He called my son stupid. Again. From the living room, I could hear Richard's raspy voice sneer. That dumb kid's only good for wiping old people's asses. He didn't even notice we were home. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. Linda didn't stop him, she never did. She was probably sitting in that stained recliner of hers, nodding along like always. And I just stood there in the hallway with the groceries digging into my arms. Mason clutching my coat, asking quietly, "Did Grandpa mean me?" I told him no, of course I did. I always told him no, but he knew. He wasn't dumb. He was 11, smart in a way they could never see, because it didn't come in the form of test scores or backtalk. He was kind, gentle, and he loved drawing more than anything else. But that didn't matter to Richard or Linda. They'd decided a long time ago he wasn't worth anything. I used to take it. I used to swallow every insult they threw at me, every backhanded comment about how Michael married beneath his potential, how I wasn't teaching Mason how to be a man. I stayed silent for years because they were Michael's parents and I loved him. God, I loved him. But after that car crash tore our world apart, something in them twisted further, and I became nothing but the live-in help, a warm body to cook their meals and keep the lights on. Mason became a burden they tolerated. I remember looking at Mason that night, the way his eyes shimmered, but he blinked it back like he always did, like he'd learned not to cry because even that would be too sensitive. I put the groceries down. I knelt beside him and said, "We're leaving." He looked at me like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. "We're leaving," I said again. "For good." He nodded. Didn't ask where. Didn't ask how. Just nodded. We packed in silence. 2 suitcases. Some savings from what was left of Michael's life insurance. Enough to get us out of that rotten house in Detroit. They didn't stop us. Richard muttered something about how I'd come crawling back. Linda just stared at the TV. We never did crawl back. And I won't lie, starting over in Charlotte wasn't easy. The rent chewed through what we had. I worked at a diner for minimum wage, bussing tables for men who talked to me like I was invisible. But every night, Mason would sit at the kitchen table and sketch something, houses, faces, dreams, and I knew it was worth it. Sometimes I still hear Richard's voice in my head. Sometimes I still wake up angry, fists clenched, breath shallow. But Mason sleeps peacefully now. That's more than I ever had growing up. And no one calls my son stupid in this house. Not ever again. "I'd like to see you again, Michelle, if that's okay." Michael said it so softly, like he was afraid to push, like he genuinely cared about what I wanted. And I said yes. I didn't even have to think about it. I said yes because, for the first time in my life, someone was talking to me like I mattered. Like my pace, my story, my silent seal of it was worth respecting. And it scared the hell out of me, but I smiled anyway. "Of course. Let's meet again." He smiled like a kid who just got picked first in kickball. And he thanked me like I was the one doing him a favor. But I was the one lucky enough to have met someone who wasn't trying to fix me, use me, or mold me into something I wasn't. Michael never rushed anything. He never judged. I didn't have to explain every broken part of my past for him to stay. And so, we saw each other again, then again, and again, until one night, he told me he loved me. And I didn't panic. I just cried, because someone finally said it and meant it. We got married when I was 28. Quiet courthouse, just the 2 of us and a photographer. No guests. Michael understood I had no one to invite. He didn't make me feel ashamed of that. No wedding dress, no speeches, just a simple kiss and a photo I still keep beside my bed. When Mason was born 2 years later, I thought maybe I'd finally earned something good. We named him Mason because we wanted him to be strong. Not the kind of strong that hides emotions, but the kind that survives. Michael held him that night and whispered, "I think this is the happiest I've ever been." Me too. God, me too. We bought a house in the Charlotte suburbs. Right after Mason's birth, a brand new 2-story with a backyard and a swing set. We couldn't really afford, but bought anyway because we believed in the future. I never thought I'd be the woman folding baby clothes in a laundry room she owned. Not after all I'd survived in that house in rural Kentucky. Treated like a burden in someone else's family photo. Michael knew all of that me ugly childhood, the abuse, the fear, and still chose me. Then came the crash. 6 months after Mason was born, Michael was on a work call in the car. Distracted driver ran a red light. He didn't make it. At the funeral, I was holding Mason and barely breathing when Linda screamed at me, "It's your fault. You took him from us. If he'd married someone educated, someone decent, maybe he'd still be alive." She had hated me from the beginning. Richard too, because I didn't finish college, because I wasn't good enough for their son. And now she had the excuse she always wanted to blame me. But I didn't care. I didn't care what she said, because the man I loved was gone. And the only thing keeping me upright was the tiny heartbeat resting against my chest. My son. My reason. Michael's cousin stepped in at the funeral. Thank God. If he hadn't, Linda would have kept screaming at me in front of the casket, blaming me for the crash, for Michael's death, for everything. But somehow, by some miracle, we got through the service without a full-blown scene. Still, the damage was done. And after that, I was just floating. Days passed in slow motion. The 40-day memorial service was coming up, and I kept asking myself the same thing. What now? I had no one left. No parents. The relatives who raised me in Kentucky hadn't heard from me in years. I hadn't even told them I got married. I didn't see the point. They'd never treated me like family anyway. And now with Michael gone, I didn't have a single person I could lean on. The house was paid off thanks to his life insurance policy. So at least Mason and I weren't about to be homeless. But every corner of that place screamed of him, his cologne on the coat hanging by the door, his stupid mugs he never washed, the toolbox he always left open like he was coming right back. I'd stand in the kitchen and just feel sick from how much life was in that place and how gone he was from it. I started thinking maybe we should leave, sell the house, go somewhere fresh, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knew me as the widow who let her husband die. And then, of all people, Linda and Richard showed up on our porch, brought flowers, said they were sorry. We weren't thinking straight at the funeral, Linda muttered. We were just lost. Then Richard asked, "So what's your plan now?" I told them honest. I was considering selling the house and starting over somewhere else. They both looked shocked. "You can't," Linda blurted out. "You have to stay. This is Michael's house. This is your home. And we'll help," Richard added. "If you ever need anything, we'll be there." And maybe I was too broken, too desperate for kindness, because for a second, I believed them. We stayed. Mason and I stayed. And for a while, it was quiet. But Michael had always been the dam holding back the flood. Once he was gone, there was nothing stopping them. A few weeks later, I got a call at work. "Linda, acting helpless. My back's acting up again," she said. "Come over this weekend and help me with the cleaning, would you?" I sighed. She didn't sound like she was in pain. In fact, she sounded like she'd just come back from her bridge club. "I'm sorry, Mason's got a doctor's appointment. His eczema's been flaring up." "Oh, come on," she snapped. "That can wait. Your husband's parents should come first." I didn't say anything right away, but I felt it's a me thing snapping inside me. "No, not this time. Not anymore. I'm sorry, I have to get back to work." I said it calmly, even though I was still on my lunch break. I lied, hung up before she could guilt trip me more. Linda had called again. Of course she had, asking if I could come over this weekend and help clean. Said her back was flaring up. Again, same excuse as always. Normally, I'd cave, bite my tongue and go. But Mason had his dermatologist appointment this Saturday, has been scratching his arms raw in his sleep, and I wasn't pushing that back. Not for her. Not again. Still, I could already hear her voice in my head, sharp and smug. "I raised your husband. The least you can do is vacuum my floors." And then she'd throw in something about respect or family duty. And I'd nod along like I owed her something for marrying Michael. But I don't owe her a damn thing. The guilt still claws at me though. She's his mother. And now that he's gone, I'm all she has. Or that's what she tells everyone. "Michelle's like a daughter to me," she'll say at church, all fake sweet and smiling. Then the moment we're alone, she turns cold, condescending, like I'm some disappointment she's been forced to tolerate. And Richard is no better. Every time I show up, it's some passive-aggressive jab about how I'm not raising Mason the right way. "You didn't even finish college. How are you supposed to guide that boy?" He'll mutter from his recliner like he's lecturing a failing student. I don't answer. I never do. Because if I speak, I'll say something I can't take back, and then Michael's face flashes through my mind, the way he'd smile and smooth things over, and I swallow the fire instead. But it burns, and Mason sees everything. He's not dumb, no matter what they say. He's 12 now, growing into this sharp, observant kid, and I can tell he hears the way they talk to me, how they stop praising him because he's not smart like his dad, how they act disappointed that he'd rather play soccer than memorize multiplication tables. If he has time to kick a ball, he has time to study, Linda hissed once, right in front of him. And when his test scores came back low, Richard sighed and said, "Shame he got your brain and not Michael's." I pretended I didn't hear it, like always, but Mason did. One day he looked at me and asked, "Why are Grandma and Grandpa always mean to you?" And Linda froze, like she hadn't expected the kid she used to cuddle to notice the way she treats his mom. No one said anything. She didn't even try to explain. By the time he hit 8th grade, he started stepping in. If Linda raised her voice, he'd say, "Don't talk to my mom like that." And God, part of me wanted to pull him back, but the other part, the bigger part, I wanted to cheer. She raised her hand to slap Melinda, her face twisted, eyes wild, like she'd been waiting for an excuse. But before she could touch me, Mason stepped between us. He was just coming around the corner, back from the store, probably heard the shouting from outside. His hand caught her wrist midair. "Seriously, Grandma," his voice was calm but firm. "You were really about to hit my mom? You little, how dare you lay a hand on me?" She snapped, twisting her arm like she was the victim. "I didn't hit you," he said, dropping her arm like it was burning his skin. "You're the one who tried to hit her. Don't act like I didn't see it." Then he turned to me, eyes soft, and said, "Come on, Mom. Let's go. We don't need to be here anymore." He was in 8th grade then, growing fast, taller than me already, and strong not just in his body, but in that quiet, steady way that came from seeing too much too young. I nodded, and we walked out together. I could hear Richard yelling something behind us, probably calling me ungrateful, accusing me of turning his grandson against him, but I didn't care. Not that day. Not with Mason walking beside me like a shield I never asked for, but always needed. After that, Mason never let them near me again without a wall of silence between us. He'd see through every fake smile, every passive-aggressive jab. They said he was a cold kid, said it when they thought he couldn't hear, called him unlovable, even though he looked just like Michael did at that age. I used to think, if he were the golden boy they wanted, they'd spoil him rotten, and honestly, I'm glad he wasn't. I'm glad he saw them for who they were. 15 years passed since Michael died. I turned 46 this year, almost 50. Life doesn't stop, no matter how long you spend grieving. But now everything's shifted again. Their house had won in Detroit, falling apart with a definitely gave out. Roof leaking, mold everywhere, rats probably. Linda called last week and said, "We can't live here anymore. We'll move into your place. You don't mind, do you?" Of course I minded, but they knew I'd never outright abandon them. If I refused, I'd be the heartless widow. If I said no, they'd expect me to cover the cost of repairs of thousands. So the first gave in. Again, they moved in, jobless, bitter, and demanding. I worked 50 hours a week. Mason had school. Still, every time I walked through that door, it was another list. Do the laundry, clean the yard, and tonight, make USDA prime ribeye. Don't buy cheap stuff again. They barked orders like we were staff in their personal retirement home. They didn't lift a finger, not a dish, not a broom. Just sat in my house and sucked the air out of it. And the worst part? They still believed I owed them something. You really made it through life with that level of brain power? Honestly, Michelle, it's impressive you can even tie your own shoes. Richard didn't even look up from the couch when he said it. Just spat it out like it was another fact about the weather. And Linda, without missing a beat, added, "No wonder Mason turned out the way he did. Raised by a woman like you. What else could we expect?" They said crap like that every day. After a year of living under the same roof, their insults weren't just routine, they were venomous little rituals. I'd gotten used to tuning them out, but that didn't mean they stopped hurting, especially when they dragged Mason into it. He was smart, just not in the way they valued. Not the college prep, honor roll, perfect set kind of smart. But they didn't care. If he wasn't a reflection of their dead son, he wasn't worth praising. It had been almost a year since they moved into our place in Charlotte, and every damn day was tension. Mason and I tried to stay out of their way. We went out when we could, stayed late at school, at work, anywhere that wasn't home. And on the day of Mason's high school orientation, we'd taken the whole afternoon. Ceremony in the morning, a nice meal out after he splurged on a reservation at the Capitol Grill because he deserved to feel celebrated. Then we hit a few shops, laughed about how big his new backpack was, and before we knew it, the sun was going down. "We better sneak in," Mason whispered. "They'll go off if they know we had fun." We slipped in through the side door like criminals in our own home, but they were still up, sitting in the living room with the TV blaring. Richard's voice traveled all the way down the hall. "So today was his orientation, right?" "Yeah, to that bottom-of-the-barrel school. What a damn embarrassment." Linda chuckled. "Like mother, like son. They belong there. Bunch of losers." I froze. My chest burned like I'd swallowed acid. That school wasn't elite, no, but it was a good school. A real school, with good teachers and decent kids. But that wasn't the point. The point was how little they thought of us. Not just me. U.S. I saw Mason's jaw clench. He looked up at me and said quietly, "They don't even see us as people, do they?" And that's when it hit Meherd. They didn't keep us around because of family or love. They kept us here because they needed us. After Michael died, I'd tried to move out, start over, and they begged me to stay. Back then, I thought it was grief, but it wasn't. They needed someone to cook, to clean, to haul them to doctor's appointments. I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was the live-in caregiver they didn't have to pay, and Mason was just insurance for the future. That wasn't grief. That was strategy. That was survival. Theirs, not ours. They did whatever they wanted, day in, day out, barked orders, mocked my son, trashed everything I did for a long time. I took it, swallowed the poison, and told myself it was just temporary, that they were grieving, that I was strong enough to carry the weight for all of us. But the truth is, I wasn't surviving. I was disappearing, slowly, one command, one insult, one ignored boundary at a time. And it wasn't until I looked at Mason, really looked at him sitting on the floor of his room, with his textbooks open, trying to stay focused while pretending he couldn't hear his grandparents call him a disappointment, from the living room, that I realized if we didn't leave, if we didn't do something, then this would be our life forever, and they would drag us down with them. So I turned to him and said, "We're moving." He just nodded and said, "Yeah, let's go." We had no backup, no relatives, no one to call for help. My parents were long gone, and I hadn't heard from the aunt who raised me in Kentucky since I left that house at 18. But we had one thing. We had a way out, a window of time. Richard and Linda had been planning a 2-night, 3-day trip to a spa resort up in Michigan. Some Social Security-funded getaway they'd been bragging about for months, and of course, we weren't invited. We would live and help get a vacation. So we waited, quietly packed up what mattered, paid for a moving company, and the second their car pulled out of the driveway, we were in motion. Movers in and out in under 6 hours. Everything Michael and I ever bought gone from that house. We left behind nothing but the things they brought in. When they came back, they'd find a house stripped to its bones, cold and hollow. Right around sunset on their 3rd day, my phone rang. I saw Linda's name flashing on the screen and knew the storm was coming. "Where the hell are you?" she shouted the second I answered. I held the phone away from my ear. "Lower your voice, or I'll hang up. You can't just do this. The house is empty." "That's right," I said calmly, "because everything in it belonged to Michael and me. And now it's with us, in our new home." "What new home?" I looked around at the high ceilings, the polished floors, the living room so big you could hear your voice echo, and Mason sitting beside me on the couch, listening quietly, the kind of peaceful I hadn't seen on his face in years. "A house in the Beverly Hills area," I said. "Big place, beautiful, just the two of us." She stuttered. How the hell did you afford that?" She had no idea I'd been promoted to manager at work 3 months ago. No idea I'd been saving every dollar I could. No idea that someone else's Summione kindred helped us make the leap. And now, we were free. This house seat's not new. It's not something I bought with some sudden windfall or lottery ticket. It used to belong to the only person outside of Michael who ever saw me without judgment. The one friend I had before I forgot how to trust people. Her name was Hannah Irwin. She was the only person I ever let pass the walls I started building when my parents died. We met back in junior year of high school. I was the quiet girl in the back, the one who didn't talk unless forced, the one who answered roll call like it was a personal invasion. Hannah, she was the total Oppositzenlight in human form. She sat down next to me the first day of class and said, "Hi, I'm Hannah. Mind if I call you Michelle?" Just like that, easy and open. I remember nodding, unsure why she even bothered. I didn't give people reasons to stick around, but she did. She kept showing up. She'd wave at me in the hall, ask about my sketchbook, always smiling like we'd been friends for years. One day, I asked her, "Why do you even care? Why are you always talking to me?" And she looked right at me and said, "Because I'm a fan. That painting you did, the one that hung in the school office last summer, I saw it and I knew Wover made this sees the world in a way I want to understand. No one had ever said that to me before. I'd grown up believing my art was something to hide, something childish, something that didn't matter in the real world. After my parents died and I ended up with my aunt in rural Kentucky, dreams were a luxury I was told I couldn't afford. I never got to apply to art school. I still painted, but always in secret. But Hannah saw it. That moment cracked something open. I let her in. We became inseparable after that. We called each other sisters, even after she went off to a top-tier university. And I stayed behind to work. We stayed close. She got into a big-name firm, then started her own company. She worked like hell, built an empire. Bought this house in Beverly Hills when she was just 31. She passed away last year. Cancer. Quiet, fast, and cruel. I hadn't seen her in person in a while, just messages and video calls. But she left a letter, said if anything happened, she wanted this house to go to me and Mason. "You gave me courage," she wrote. "Now it's my turn." So when Linda screamed into the phone, "What the hell are you doing in that house?" all I said was, "I'm finally living somewhere I'm wanted." Because Hannah never saw me as baggage. She saw me as someone who deserved more. Hannah was the only one I ever trusted besides Michael. Her husband worked a quiet office job, nothing flashy. Just a good man with kind eyes and a calming voice that balanced out Hannah's fire. She was always the bold one, sharp and fearless. The kind of person who didn't ask permission to speak the truth. They'd lived in that big Beverly Hills house for years, just the two of them. She paid for it in cash, I later found out. Every inch of it, from the marble floors to the terrace that overlooked the hills, was built from her own sweat. Every promotion, every risk, every fight she took on to build her company. Even knowing that, I never felt like I could ask her for help. She had her own life, her own marriage, and I didn't want to dump my chaos into her peace. I never told her about how bad things had gotten with Linda and Richard. Not for years. Not until one afternoon when Mason was in 8th grade, and I brought her a small souvenir from a trip I'd taken for work. She accepted it with a smile, but before I could even sit down, she asked, "Michelle, is something going on?" I froze. She didn't say it casually. She knew. I laughed it off at first, said I was just tired, but she tilted her head and waited, didn't press. Just gave me that look that said, "You don't have to lie to me." So I told her. I told her everything. About the yelling, the manipulation, the guilt trips, the way they spoke about Mason behind closed doors, like he wasn't their grandson, like he was a problem they were stuck with because he wasn't Michael. I told her how I'd considered leaving, more than once, but felt trapped by loyal Tybeckhouse. They were Michael's parents, and part of me still couldn't let go of the idea that walking away meant betraying him. She sat there quietly for a while, then said, "Michelle, I get it. But even if they're family, Mason deserves better than to be raised in a house where he hears the people closest to him tear his mother apart, and you deserve better than to survive on guilt." She was right, of course, and just telling her lifted something off my chest. After that, I talked to her more often. Whenever things got too heavy, I'd call her, and she listened. About 6 months after Linda and Richard moved in, I was visiting her again when she looked me in the eye and said, "You know, we've been thinking my husband and I want to downsize. Just bought a smaller place near his new office. Why don't you and Mason move in here?" I blinked. "Are you serious?" She smiled. "Dead serious. That house is too big for us now, but it'd be the perfect place for a fresh start." And just like that, I could breathe again. "I mean, we bought this house when things were booming," Hannah said casually, sipping her iced coffee, "but now it's too much. Neither of us has time for it. We outsource everything: laundry, landscaping, even grocery delivery. Honestly, it feels like we're living in a showroom, not a home." I smiled, unsure where this was going, until she leaned in and added, "You're reliable. You take care of your home, and I know you'd take care of this one. I want you to live here, Michelle. You and Mason." I blinked. "Wait, are you serious?" "Completely," she said. "Property taxes are a little higher than average, but with your salary, it's manageable. Plus, we're buying a smaller place closer to my husband's office. This one needs someone who actually wants to live in it." I ran the numbers in my head, and she was right. I could make it work. And then she dropped the real bomb. "And I don't want Linda and Richard moving in with you. I want you to leave them behind." My stomach twisted. I had always hesitated to walk away, because they were Michael's parents, because part of me still believed I was honoring his memory by putting up with their cruelty. But she was right. Mason had grown up listening to them call him names behind his back. I had endured years of being treated like a maid, like a burden, like I owed them my life. And for what? Some twisted sense of duty? I paused, then nodded slowly. "You're right. It's time." We started the paperwork that week. Hannah and her husband moved out within days, and Mason and I began packing. The strange thing was, even as our things disappeared one by one from that house in Charlotte, Linda and Richard didn't notice. They never paid attention to anything that wasn't about them. Mason didn't hesitate for a second. "Do we get to leave for real this time?" he asked, eyes lighting up like I hadn't seen since Michael died. "Yes," I told him. "For real." I was planning to tell them gently, maybe even face to face. But then I heard them talking in the kitchen about me again. "Well, when Michelle finally caves and quits that job, she'll have all the time in the world to take care of us," Richard said, laughing. "She's the caregiver now, whether she likes it or not." That was it. I picked up the phone and said, "We're selling the house. You'll need to start packing." Silence. Then Linda, "What do you mean? You can't just..." Then Richard grabbed the phone. "I heard everything. This is outrageous. You're our daughter-in-law. You belong here. It's your duty to care for us." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, "That duty died with your son, and I won't let it bury mine." And I hung up. Richard sat there, puffed up with indignation, still trying to act like he had the upper hand. "You can't just walk away. You're our daughter-in-law. You owe us." I looked him dead in the eyes and said, calm and flat, "What version of the world are you living in?" Mason sat beside me, silent, but with his jaw clenched so tight I could hear the tension crackle. I turned back to Richard, and by the way, he filed the affidavit of marital termination at the same time we moved out. "So legally, I'm no longer family. We're strangers now." What the hell is that?" he barked, confused but already afraid. "It's a legal document," I explained coldly, "used when a spouse has died. It severs all legal obligation to that spouse's family. No more ties, no more expectations, no more manipulation." I'd known about it for years, since the weeks after Michael died, when the world was still spinning and people were whispering at the funeral. But I couldn't bring myself to file it back then. I kept telling myself I owed them something because they lost a son, because I had Mason, because I'd promised Michael I'd take care of everyone. But I wasn't taking care of anyone. I was just bleeding out, slowly, for people who didn't even see me as a person. Hannah was the one who finally said it. "I can't keep watching you suffer like this, Michelle. You deserve peace." And she was right. "You don't get to decide that," Richard snapped. "We never saw you as a caregiver. You're family. You're important to us." "Save it," Mason cut in, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "You called her a caregiver. We heard you. You talked about her like she was just some tool you could use when it suited you. So don't insult us now with fake kindness." Richard fumbled for a response, but there was nothing he could say that we hadn't already heard too many times. I kept going. You thought I'd never leave. You thought love from Michael would trap me here forever. But you were wrong. I was loyal to the man I loved, not to the people who turned his death into leverage. There was silence on the other end of the line. And then, finally, I heard Etha's voice, small and cracking. I'm sorry. For what we did. For what I said. Just please don't sell the house. Don't leave us. I almost laughed. Now he remembered how to apologize. Now, when there was no one left to cook, clean, or carry their pride. I'm sorry, I said. I can't hear you when you whisper. Speak up. I said I'm sorry. I nodded. That's nice, but it doesn't change a thing. Then I hung up. For good. You think just because you're broke and old, I'm going to throw my life away for you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My tone was cold, flat, final. I could see Richard flinch from the other side of the call, even though we weren't face to face. That was the thing about people like him, they acted big when they thought you were trapped. But the moment they realized you could walk away, they panicked. The truth, their biggest fear wasn't loneliness. It was losing control. They never cared about being family. They cared about being served. Come on, Michelle, he said, trying to keep his voice even. We lost Michael, and now our home? You want us to die in some roach-infested apartment complex? Don't be dramatic, I replied. You made this choice when you used me like a live-in nurse instead of a person. That was the real reason they fought so hard to keep me. Richard had quit working last year, burned through what little savings they had, and now they were living off Social Security. No budgeting, no planning. They blew half their check on a 2-night stay at a high-end resort because we deserve to enjoy life. Well, we still can, and now they expected me to cover for it, to keep working full-time while they lounged around judging me and berating my son. You're insane if you think I'll let you leech off me forever. You think it's that easy, he growled. Just cut us off like that? Already did, I said. You're talking to someone who filed the affidavit of marital termination last week. That shut him up. I'm not legally your daughter-in-law anymore, I continued. Mason and I are free. So if you need a caregiver, try Craigslist. He didn't respond. The phone shuffled, and then I heard Linda's voice. Michelle, please, she whimpered. We're sorry. We'll do better. I don't want your apology, I said. And I don't believe you. There was a silence that made my stomach turn, but not out of guilt, out of pure hot, long-delayed rage. I'm being very clear right now. Mason and I want nothing to do with you. We hate how you've treated us. We're not coming back. And honestly, if you end up alone and broke, I won't lose a second of sleep over it. Her sobs spilled through the speaker, but I felt nothing. I suggest you find a way out of that house quickly, I said, because it's being sold. A letter's coming in the mail with the final deadline. Goodbye. And I hung up before she could finish whatever lie she was about to tell. I blocked both their numbers. Mason did the same. Should we go get new phones tomorrow? He asked, like he was talking about going to the movies. Yeah, I said, let's do that. The next day, we skipped our moving checklist and went straight to the electronics store. For the first time in years, we both picked out new Finessa model, same color. Just a little thing to celebrate this new life. One that didn't involve manipulation, guilt, or walking on eggshells. We sent one final letter. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It simply informed them the house had been sold and that they needed to vacate. By the end of the month, to my surprise, they actually moved out on time. I guess they knew there was no use fighting anymore. We heard from a mutual acquaintance that they'd ended up in one of those rundown public housing complexes in Detroit. The kind that's cheap because people say it's haunted. Moldy walls, broken radiators, barely working plumbing. The kind of place where people don't smile in the hallways. They looked awful, apparently. Sunken eyes, shabby clothes, no energy to pretend anymore. Word is they both had to find part-time jobs just to scrape by. Maybe if this were someone else's story, I'd feel bad. But I don't, because what they're living now, that's what they earned. Meanwhile, Mason and I finally got to breathe. He's in high school now, happier than I've ever seen him. He jokes more, sleeps better, eats better, and I feel human again. Even my co-workers noticed. You look lighter, one of them told me, like someone finally turned the lights back on. They were right. For the first time in my adult life, I had nothing to apologize for. Hannah still drops by sometimes. She and Mason get along. Greeth calls her Aunt Hannah even though she's technically not family. But that title feels more real than anything I ever had with Linda or Richard. Last week, she walked in holding two coffees and said, "You two are glowing." Did I miss a spa day? Mason laughed and shouted, "Just happiness." I stood in that sunlit living room, the one I used to only dream about, and I watched him smile without fear. I looked around at our clean space, free of tension and bitterness, and thought this is what peace feels like. And in that quiet moment, I just whispered in my heart, "Please let it last."